Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just wait a minute to get started as we have a few more attendees joining. This session will be recorded and we can share a copy of that recording with you if you want to go back and refer to it. Hi, Matt.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Daryl.
Good to see you.
Week is flying by.
Absolutely.
2021 is flying by.
Yeah, right? All right, so I think we can get started. We'll start off by providing some instructions for this afternoon's community meeting. We will be providing this information in both English and Spanish with Spanish interpretation. I'm going to go ahead and start that. So what that means is everyone in this meeting, all of the panelists and the attendees will need to choose a language. So you're going to need to either choose English or Spanish, and don't do it just yet. We will have Q&A in both English and Spanish. We have interpreters in both. So if we have questions that are spoken or typed in Spanish, our interpreters will translate those for our English speaking presenters, and then they will translate the answers back into Spanish. Pamela, if you could go ahead and give instructions to our Spanish speaking attendees.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Pamela Perales, soy una intérprete del español y estoy acá con mi cointérprete Claudia. El día de hoy esta reunión se va a llevar a cabo en español e inglés y le voy a explicar cómo puede elegir un canal para participar en su idioma de preferencia. Estamos usando la función de interpretación en Zoom. Si usted está usando una computadora, verá un icono de globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Todavía no está disponible ya que no hemos activado la función de interpretación. Le avisaré cuando buscar el icono. Si usa una tableta o un teléfono, pulse en más o en los 3 puntos suspensivos y verá un menú que incluye la opción de interpretación de idiomas. Para escuchar la interpretación, pulse el icono terráqueo o interpretación de idiomas y a continuación elija su canal de idioma preferido. Si está usando un teléfono o una tableta, haga clic en listo o done. En este momento voy a aceptar la invitación a ser intérprete y va a poder ver el icono del globo terráqueo o los 3 puntos suspensivos donde puede seleccionar su idioma. Buenas tardes.
Perfect. Thank you, Pamela. So at this time, if you could please choose your language of choice. So you'll click the interpretation button at the bottom and you'll choose either English or Spanish. And all of us, including panelists, will need to do so.
Michelle, there's a question about Arabic translation.
Tony, let me make you a co-host, and if you don't mind responding to that one.
I can type an answer now.
Okay, thanks. I think we are all set. Has everyone chosen their languages and everybody in English hopefully can hear us in English? So if you would like to ask questions, there is a Q&A box, and I'm just going to add Pamela as an interpreter really quickly. All right. And Spanish, there we go. If you have questions, you can type them in the Q&A, and at the end of the first presentation, we will answer them. I guess I should take a step back. We have 2 separate presentations. The first will be by Tanya Carruthers, and she will be presenting on the first ordinance, where she's going to present on organic waste disposal reduction. This ordinance applies, these new ordinances apply to both Gilroy and Morgan Hill. So she'll present on that. And then we'll open the Q&A where you can either raise your hand and we'll call on you, or you can type your question and we'll read it and respond via the Q&A. Once we have completed that presentation, Tiffany Brown will be presenting on the trash enclosures ordinance, which only applies to Morgan Hill. Our Gilroy participants are welcome to stay on and listen if they're curious. Once she has completed her presentation, we will open the Q&A in both English and Spanish for that item. And I think without further ado, Tanya, you can go ahead and get started.
All right, thank you. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Oh, the screen sharing is disabled.
Oh, of course it is. That's okay. There you go.
Thanks. All right, can you see my screen? Okay, thank you. Then we will get started. So welcome everyone to the Morgan Hill and Gilroy Business Community Meeting. As Michelle mentioned, we are going to be presenting on 2 ordinances today. The first will be the mandatory organic waste disposal reduction ordinance, which is being proposed in both Morgan Hill and Gilroy. And the second will be the refuse and recycling enclosure ordinance, which is only being proposed in the city of Morgan Hill. The draft ordinances and the supporting materials are posted online. The links are shown on the screen. And if you have questions or comments that come up after this meeting, please reach out to me, tanya.crothers@morganhill.ca.gov. This information will be posted on the questions slide at the end of this presentation as well. So if you need it and don't have a pen handy, you can grab one and you can get this information down at the end of the presentation. So real quick, today's presentation on the mandatory organic waste disposal reduction ordinance and the enclosure ordinance. We're going to start with some background on SB 1383, and then I'll give you a quick overview of the 1383 requirements, just so that you know why the city are proposing this ordinance and how the ordinance came about. And then we'll get into the actual requirements of the ordinance itself as being proposed in both cities. We'll have our first round of questions, then we'll go into the enclosure ordinance, which is Morgan Hill only, and then we'll have questions round 2. After the first round of questions, Morgan Hill folks are welcome to stay on if you want to hear about the trash enclosure ordinance being proposed in Morgan Hill, or you may choose to exit after that first round of questions. It's totally up to you. So to get into 1383, a little bit of background. Organic waste like food scraps, yard trimmings, paper, and cardboard make up more than half of what Californians dump into landfills every year. To be exact, you can see in that pie chart on the screen that organic waste makes up about 66% of the waste stream in California. And then on the pie chart, it also shows that 18% of that organic waste is food waste, including edible food scraps. So meanwhile, 1 in 8 Californians are food insecure, as shown on that slide, including 1 in 5 children. Landfilling organic waste, which, as I just mentioned, is about 2/3 or 66% of our food stream, of our waste stream in California, leads to a breakdown in the process of the organic material, and it creates a lot of methane gas. Methane is a super pollutant, it's extra potent, and it contributes to climate change in California. We've all experienced some level of climate change lately. Rising sea levels, reduced snowpack, wildfires, drought, heat waves. So the state adopted SB 1383 in 2016 to reduce organic waste going into landfills. The idea is that if we can reduce organic waste going to landfills, we'll reduce methane being emitted from landfills and therefore reduce impacts from climate change. This is just a timeline of key implementation dates for SB 1383. And what I want to draw your attention to is that bright red box right in the middle. January 1st, 2022, coming right up. That's when the regulations for SB 1383 take effect. And at that time, the city is required to have enforceable programs in place that are compliant with the SB 1383 requirements. So the next question would be, well, what enforceable programs exactly are we talking about that need to be rolled out in early 2022? So this slide on the screen shows a basic overview of what's required of the city under SB 1383. And so to summarize the ordinance that we're just about to get into, the ordinance basically describes the requirements of 2 programs that are mandated under SB 1383 to reduce methane gas coming out of landfills. And that includes that first hexagon, which is an organic waste recycling program. And then that second hexagon, which is an edible food recovery program. That third hexagon is education and outreach to the community. And the last hexagon you see up there is monitoring, inspection, and enforcement. And those items are also written into the ordinance as they pertain to the 2 programs I mentioned for organic waste recycling and edible food recovery. So we'll go over those 4 aspects of 1383 today. Those 2 hexagons that I skipped are not written into the ordinance, and so we're not going to discuss them today because they don't apply to this particular meeting. So we'll start with the organic waste recycling program. There's 2 entities that are regulated under the organic waste recycling program, 2 main ones, and that's single family properties that generate organic waste, which is all of them, and then also commercial businesses that generate organic waste. And I'll just go through the basics of the ordinance as they apply to single family waste generators first. So single family properties are required to subscribe to the city's organic waste collection services for all organic waste generated. And there's 3 basic provisions that apply to single family properties, and that's that the city has the right to conduct oversight and inspect those container bins and make sure that everything is being properly sorted and that the bins are big enough to hold all of the materials being generated by that property. Number 2 is that if upon inspection of a container, it's shown that the level of service is not adequate, then the city may request that the property adjust their level of service for a specific bin. And then the last one, number 3, the ordinance just stipulates that generators of organic waste can manage waste through prevention and reduction or a community composting site. So it's just specifying that you don't have to use the bins. There are other ways to reduce and recycle organic waste. So that's it for the single family organic waste generators. Now we'll move on to the commercial business organic waste generators. And you'll notice that this slide looks very similar to the single family slide. And that's because the first 3 provisions are identical. So starting in 2022, commercial businesses that generate organic waste will be required to sign up for the city's organic waste collection services for all organic waste generated. And the first 3 provisions are exactly the same. So the city has the right to inspect the bins and check for level of service and check that sorting is being done correctly. The city is allowed to request that the business adjust their level of service if it's found to be inadequate upon inspection. And then also the ordinance specifies that you may manage your organic waste through prevention and reduction, or you can participate in a community composting site or manage your waste on site. So commercial businesses have some additional items that they have to comply with in addition to the original 3. Number 4 up here is that you are required to supply and allow access to an adequate number of properly sized and located collection containers with the proper labels and colors to all of your employees, contractors, tenants, and customers. Number 5, you'll need to provide collection containers in user spaces. That includes indoors and outdoors. So the idea here is that if you have a place on your business property, inside or outside, where you have a gray waste container that collects materials for landfills, you need to also install the complete set. So you'll need a blue waste container for recycling and the green waste for food scraps. Number 6, you'll need to provide new tenant education. So if you have a new tenant on your property before or within 14 days of occupation of the premises, you need to just make sure that the new folks know the location of the containers and the requirements for sorting properly into those containers. And then the final one, number 7, is that you need to make sure that your existing contractors, employees, tenants, and customers are aware of the sorting requirements and the organic waste recovery requirements, and that they understand what their responsibilities are in helping you to reach organic waste sorting goals. There are waivers available for organic waste generators. There's 2. There's a de minimis waiver and a physical space waiver. The de minimis waiver is for businesses that generate over 2 cubic yards of waste per week and who can show that of that, less than 20 gallons per week per bin is organic waste. And then if you generate less than 2 cubic yards per week, then you just have to show that less than 10 gallons of that waste per container is organic waste. The physical space waiver is for businesses that can demonstrate that the premises lacks adequate space for the collection of the containers required. So that concludes the organic waste recycling program. And as you recall from that hexagon slide, there were 2 basic programs that are being implemented through the ordinance. The second one is a commercial edible food recovery program. And so edible food generators under this program will be required to arrange food recovery through a contract or a written agreement with food recovery organizations or services who will collect or accept your self-hauled edible food for food recovery, meaning these organizations through a contract with you will take in your food and then they will redistribute it to hungry Californians. The businesses covered by the commercial edible food recovery program are divided into tiers, and there's specific businesses that are required to comply. The tier 1 start date is January 2022, and the tier 2 is January 2024. Tier 1 businesses that will be required to comply in 2022 are wholesale food vendors, food service providers and distributors, grocery stores that are over 10,000 square feet, and supermarkets. Tier 2 businesses that will be required to comply with the commercial edible food recovery program by 24 include restaurants over 5,000 square feet, hotels with on-site food facilities and 200 plus rooms, local education agencies with on-site food facilities, large venues and events, and then health facilities with at least 100 beds and on-site food facilities. So there are some other entities that are regulated by the ordinance in general, aside from just the single family properties and commercial businesses. These entities support the organic waste recycling program and the edible food recovery program to ensure proper pickup, recycling, and/or redistribution of organic waste and food scraps. SB 1383 regulates these support entities, the ones that are shown there on the screen, including food recovery organizations and services, haulers, including self-haulers, and facility operators and community composting operations. A lot of what these entities are required to do is report what they're taking in and report how they're dealing with the organic waste that you're going to be giving to them. The one other part of the ordinance is that the ordinance has an inspection program. It becomes effective starting in 2022. And it just specifies that the city or a designated representative is authorized to conduct inspections or investigations as needed to ensure compliance with the ordinance. And regulated entities are required regulated entities being businesses and single family generators, they are required to arrange for access during the inspections, and they are required to cooperate with the inspections. And then that last bullet there, inspections can include confirmation of proper placement of materials in the containers, in-person or electronic review of your edible food recovery arrangements or activities, a review of the records that you're keeping, annual compliance reviews, complaint investigations, or any other inspection that is intended to make sure that this ordinance is being complied with. The final part to the ordinance is the enforcement chapter. A violation of any provision of the ordinance shall constitute grounds for issuance of a notice of violation. So if someone were to receive a notice of violation and they did not comply with the requirements of the notice of violation by the date listed, then the city or designated representative is required to issue penalties via an administrative citation and fine. And so I listed the fine amounts up there. The amount of the fine for first violation is $50 to $100, for a second, $100 to $200, and for a third and all subsequent violations, it can be $250 to $500 per violation. And how much the actual amount is dependent on what the violation is. So that concludes the basic summary of the ordinance. Next steps, the ordinance goes to City Council in both cities in November, December of this year, so that we can get it adopted before 2022. And the ordinance will become effective in early 2022 of next year. So again, the draft ordinances and supporting materials are posted online at the city websites. The overview that I just gave you was basic. The ordinance itself is 35 pages long. So I do encourage you to go to your city link and look at that ordinance itself to read the fine print. If you have questions or comments that come up after this meeting, again, please feel free to reach out to me. If you have a question and you write it in Spanish, I do have translators who can help me respond to you. And then the last part is that this presentation will be posted to those two city website links within the next week, and it will be in both English language and Spanish language, just to have an easy summary reference for you regarding the ordinance. And with that, we can open up to our first round of QA. Sorry.
Perfect, Tanya. So we have a typed question that Tony has typed, but for the benefit of all, I'd like to read the question and the answer. And that first question is, who is responsible for the enclosures? Is it the landlord ? And Tony's response was that would be subject to a negotiation or discussion between the commercial business itself and the landlord. Do you have anything to add to that answer, Tanya?
No.
Okay.
No.
Our next question is, we rent commercial space. Would the landlord be responsible or be fined if the tenant does not comply?
And Michelle, the next question kind of follows. It's from the same person and it's a continuation, really.
And yes, the management company pays recology and then bills tenants. Is the second part of that. Does somebody want to answer those?
I'm trying to get to the questions and I can't.
Oh yeah, if you open Q&A
At the bottom.
and click the
Yeah,
open.
it's because I have all these screens open. Sorry, 1 second.
So I'll answer the interesting part of it is that the regulations, the SB 1383 regulations that this ordinance is based on, clearly say that a commercial business is responsible for arranging for the collection services and ensuring that this is working. And I'm sorry, I should open my camera if I'm going to be talking. And so in this instance, commercial business is defined to include the owner of the building. So certainly in terms of arranging for the organic waste collection services, that is within the responsibilities of the property owner. Although we're aware that certainly many arrangements between tenants and property owners exist. There's a full range of different responsibilities that are delineated in leases. But in a strict sense, the commercial business owner, which in this case would be a management company, you know, owning a building with multiple tenants, would be responsible for arranging for the service. With regard to the question about the fines, that would be an interesting twist in this instance. If you are suggesting that you might arrange for the service and it's available on your property, but your tenants aren't complying, that's an interesting circumstance. Tanya, what are your thoughts there?
I mean, in enforcement issues that I've dealt with, usually it's the tenant that is responsible for compliance to proper sorting that comes as a result of their business. But I suppose that's something we could explore more.
And those were our two typed questions. If any members of the public have a question that they want to raise their hand and ask, you can do so at this time. Anybody that might be calling in can dial *9 to raise their hand. And we'll give that a second. And then without any other questions, it sounds like we might be able to move on to Tiffany's portion of the presentation. I'm not seeing any hands go up.
Yes, if I can add something just for the city of, just kind of understand that there's two cities involved, and so each one has their own municipal code regarding enforcement mechanisms for those things that are within the municipal code. So I encourage you to contact your city if you're worried about enforcement as far as tenants to get the specific enforcement mechanisms that are in place in the city's respective codes. So to put that in a more direct way, Morgan Hill's municipal code may have different enforcement mechanisms to it than the city of Gilroy's municipal code. So whichever city you're in, I would encourage you to go ahead and contact your respective city staff to find out the specific details.
Thanks, Bryce.
Perfect. Well, I think with that, we can move on over to Tiffany's portion of the presentation. And while she brings that up for those attending, this will be on trash enclosures. This portion is applicable to Morgan Hill only, but our Gilroy guests are welcome to stay on if they want to learn more.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tanya. That was great. Michelle, oh, here we go. Now it's letting me share. Let me get that open for everyone. All right. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So I will be talking about the new ordinance that updates refuse and recycling enclosure standards for our city. And this is from Morgan Hill. Who does this apply to? Well, we have standards for both residential and non-residential users. For residential users, more of single family or townhome style homes, you're used to the individual bins that you manage yourself. And the standards in Morgan Hill requires that these bins be screened. So you generally bring them home behind your fence, or they go in your garage, or you have an area where they go. For non-residential users, for commercial use, you typically have the larger storage bins. And these bins, as you can see on your left, are required to be screened from public view. Screens look like trash enclosures. And with the update of the new bill that Tanya introduced, we thought perfect time to update and include our new trash enclosure standards that will also help make sure there's room inside the trash enclosures for this third required bin, as Tanya had explained. So what is a trash enclosure? The picture shows you exactly what a trash enclosure looks like. This is a typical trash enclosure within a parking lot. It has solid metal doors. It's required to have a roof over it. This prevents rainwater and runoff from going inside the enclosure and contaminating any drippage from the trash cans themselves going into the storm drain. It also requires a man door. You can see on the left-hand side there, so people can enter just easily and put in their trash and not have to open the large gates in the front, which is really for the garbage trucks to get in and out and access those bins. The standards do update the sizes and heights and materials of all the enclosures. And who is this applicable to? Well, these enclosures are applicable to any new non-residential structures. It's applicable to an addition to a non-residential structure site which exceeds 30% of the existing floor area of the building, and when there is a change of use within an existing building. So for example, if we're going from a library to a restaurant. And lastly, it is applicable to new residential projects proposing a refuge and recycling enclosure. So more of a multi-family setting where they chose not to do individual service, but enclosures with the large bins. Now, this is an important slide because we're talking about enclosures and there's a lot of people that already have an existing enclosure. So we'll get into that in a second as well. So enclosures will also have interior standards. Interior standards that are new include the enclosure must have a curb inside. This helps prevent damage from the bins bouncing against the walls. And again, this is just a summary of the standards, but just to get a gist, the newer things is the curb that also requires to be plumbed to sanitary sewer system with grease trap. This is really important for restaurant uses because that grease that may come out of those trash cans needs to be filtered before it goes into the sewer system. And it also requires an area drain with a hose bib so that the enclosure can be properly cleaned when necessary. So temporary compliance. This is where we have users that have an existing trash enclosure. They have 2 bins, but they only have the room for the 2 bins. So what do I do to temporarily comply? Tanya talked about a waiver, but our code also requires that everyone comply with these new standards by January 1st of 2030, because we really want to make sure we're doing the proper recycling and refuge waste dump. And also we want to make sure that we help people in this transition to getting there and making sure everyone's in compliance. So we do have a temporary compliance section within our zoning standards for this. What it allows you to do is have a trash container located on the outside of the enclosure. And it has to be in an area where it is not going to roll around. So it has to be secured to the ground. There's a list of standards. Secured to the ground, it has to have a lid, so if rain comes down on it, there's not water going into the bin. It needs to be locked so people can't use your trash enclosure or take things in or out of it without you knowing about it. And it can't have odors that would be going up or aware to the adjacent users. So it needs to be, it can be there, but there are restrictions to this temporary compliance that you would need to do. But the major takeaway here is the new standards from the code apply to everybody, but those that have existing enclosures, we have a temporary compliance solution for you within the code, and everyone will need to comply with the new standards by January 1st of 2030. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions people may have.
Thank you, Tiffany. And I'll just remind our attendees, if you would like to ask a question, you can type it in the Q&A or raise your hand and we will call on you. I think you were just so thorough, Tiffany. They don't have any questions.
Excellent.
And we can give it a second. And if we don't see any questions, we can wrap up. And I'll just invite any of our teammates from Morgan Hill or Gilroy. If you have any closing comments you'd like to offer, please feel free to unmute and offer those.
I'll just end with it. If there are any questions after reading the ordinance, you can really see each standard. As Tanya suggested, make sure you go to your city's website, look at the different ordinances and check out all the different specific standards and reach out to us. We're happy to walk you through any items that you're not clear on or have questions.
And with that, Tiffany, we did get one question in the Q&A.
Okay.
What size business needs an enclosure? Smaller businesses don't need them. Is that correct?
That's not necessarily accurate. So the different disposal sizes of bins depends on the type of use, and that's all done through for Morgan Hill's Recology. Maybe Tony, Yulo, or Tanya can dive in further about that, but I believe Recology will review the use that you have and let you know what size bin you are required for what type of recycling needs you have.
Yes, and actually, Recology is an attendee, and so if Julie or one of Julie's friends wants to answer, that's she can raise her hand and we'll move her over. But in short, they will be happy to meet with people to discuss the options for bin size. One of the things that varies is frequency of collection. So you could generate a lot of waste, but have it collected multiple times a week, in which case you could have a smaller container as opposed to just one time a week, in which you would need a larger container. And Michelle, if you can bring Julie over, she did raise her hand and would be happy to add to this, I'm sure.
She is on her way over right now.
Cool. Looks like you need to unmute, Julie, and then you're good.
Good afternoon. And actually, I just wanted to chime in because you said it perfectly, Tony. We're happy to meet with everybody about what their needs are. We want to make sure they have exact capacity that they need for their weekly waste needs. So we are happy to meet with any business that needs help.
Thanks, Julie.
And I'm not seeing any other questions come in. So with that, I think we can wrap up. Tanya or Tiffany, if you have any final comments, otherwise, thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us today. Thank you very much to our interpreters for being here with us. We really appreciate your services.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah,
Well done,
thanks,
everybody.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.